announcing the arrival of His Excellency Nail M. Latipov, Ambassador of Embassy of the Russian Federation, Honorable Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Datuk Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of International Islamic University Malaysia, Professor Dr. Ismi Arif Ismail, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Academic and International University Putra Malaysia, Professor Dr. Abdul Aziz Burgut, Dean of ISTAC IIUM, and Professor Dr. Haslinda Abdullah, Director of Institute for Social Science Studies, IPSAS, UPM. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. His Excellency Nail M. Latipov, Ambassador of Embassy of the Russian Federation, Honorable Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Datuk Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of International Islamic University Malaysia, Professor Dr. Ismi Arif Ismail, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and International University Putra Malaysia, Professor Dr. Abdul Aziz Burgut, Dean of ISTAC IIUM, Professor Dr. Haslinda Abdullah, Director of Institute for Social Science Studies, IPSAS UPM, Puan Sri Masrah Abidin, professors, academicians, participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and welcome to the second distinguished lecture series on youth well-being. I am Daniel Bahardin, and I will be your Master of Ceremony for today's event. Ladies and gentlemen, the distinguished lecture series on youth well-being is an event that is organized by the Institute of Social Science Studies, IPSAS, University Putra Malaysia, and the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC IIUM. Today's event marks the second distinguished lecture series on youth well-being, where the objectives are to generate an awareness on the pressing issues related to youth well-being and their societal roles and responsibilities, to cultivate ideas and solutions to the problems related to youth well-being and engagement, as well as to provide platform for leaders, scholars, and societal players to share their thoughts and views on youth issues and challenges. The topic that will be focused today is on youth well-being societal responsibilities and the urgency of humanizing education. For your information, ladies and gentlemen, today's event is also a follow-up of the first distinguished lecture series on youth well-being that was delivered by His Highness Tengku Amir Shah Ibni Sultan Sharafuddin Idris Shah Al-Hajj, the Raja Muda of Selangor, on the 26th July 2022 in University Putra Malaysia, UPM. Members of the floor, to get the blessing from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala on our event today, let me now invite Ustaz Muhammad Nazrin Abdul Rahman for the dua recitation. Please welcome.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده. يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا ولوالدينا وارحمهم كما ربونا صغارا. ربنا اغفر لنا ولوالدينا وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب. O our Lord, forgive us and our parents and the believers in the day the account is established. اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك وطاعتك. O Allah, the changer of the hearts, make our heart firm upon your religion. اللهم إنا نسألك من الخير كله عاجله وآجله ما علمنا منه وما لم نعلم ونعوذ بك من الشر كله عاجله وآجله ما علمنا منه وما لم نعلم. اللهم إنا نسألك من خير ما سألك عبدك ونبيك ونعوذ بك من شر ما عاذ به عبدك ونبيك. اللهم إنا نسألك الجنة وما قرب إليها من قول أو عمل ونعوذ بك من النار وما قرب منها من قول أو عمل ونسألك أن تجعل كل قضاء قضيته لنا خيرا. O Allah, we ask you of all good of what we have known and what we don't know, in this world and in the hereafter. We seek refuge in you from the evil of what we have known and what we don't know in this world and in the hereafter. O Allah, we ask you all good that your servant and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to ask of you. We seek refuge in you from all evil that your servant and Prophet Muhammad used to seek refuge in you from. O Allah, we ask you for paradise and what brings us nearer to it of deeds and sayings. We seek refuge in you from hellfire and what brings us near to it of deeds and sayings. We ask you for the good consequences of your decree. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين وجعلنا للمتقين إماما. O our Lord, grant us from among our wives and offspring comfort to our eyes and make us an example for the righteous. رب اجعلنا مقيم الصلاة ومن ذريتنا ربنا وتقبل دعاء. O our Lord, make us the establishers of prayer, and from our descendants, O our Lord, accept our supplication. اللهم أصلح شباب المسلمين في كل مكان وحين ووفقهم لهداك ورضاك في الدارين. O Allah, set right our Muslim youth in all places and times and guide them to your guidance and your pleasure in this world and in the hereafter. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. O Allah, show us the truth as true and inspire us to follow it. Show us falsehood as falsehood and inspire us to abstain from it. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. O our Lord, give us in this world that which is good and in the hereafter that which is good and protect us from the punishment of the fire. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. آمين. Thank you.
Amin, Amin, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Thank you, Ustaz Muhammad Nazrin. Members of the floor, let us now enjoy the IIUM and UPM corporate videos. Ladies and gentlemen, to begin our event, let me invite Professor Dr. Abdul Aziz Burgut, Dean of ISTAC IIUM, for his welcoming remarks. Please welcome.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Good morning, everyone. Honorable Professor Emeritus Tansri Dato Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of International Islamic University, Malaysia, His Excellency Nail M. Latipov, Ambassador, Embassy of the Russian Federation to Malaysia, Your Excellencies, Professor Dr. Ismi Arif Ismail, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and Internationalization, UPM, Professor Dr. Haslinda Abdullah, Director, Institute for Social Sciences, Science Studies, IPSAS, UPM, professors, academicians, participants, students from youth organizations, ladies and gentlemen, once again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. A very good day. Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I extend my deepest and most gracious gratitude to you all. A warm welcome to the second distinguished lecture on youth well-being. A warm welcome to our special guest of honor today, Professor Emeritus Tansri Zulkifli Abdul Razak, and renowned speaker. A special welcome to honorable ambassadors and members of the diplomatic corps who are attending ISTAC IPSAS event today. We are very much touched by the participation of youth, university students, and civil society partners from UPM, IIUM, and the larger society. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall mention that this distinguished lecture is part and parcel of ISTAC IIUM and IPSAS UPM collaboration to advance the cause of youth in Malaysia and elsewhere in the Islamic world. We shall be organizing the lecture 4 times a year as a platform for the engagement of youth and wise, experienced scholars, dignitaries, and experts. It is a platform to discuss and deliberate on serious issues and challenges facing our youth at all levels. The main aim is to empower youth and develop their balanced personality for a dynamic participation in societal development and the nation building. Furthermore, ISTAC IIUM and IPSAS UPM will be signing soon an MOU to enhance collaboration in areas of research, joint conferences, and training on areas pertaining to youth and societal development, stressing the importance of Islamic thought, values, ethics, maqasid, and civilizational framework of the development of youth and society as well. The first distinguished lecture was hosted by IPSAS UPM and delivered by His Highness Tanku Amir Shah Ibn Sultan Sharafuddin Idris Shah, the Crown Prince of the State of Selangor. Today, our second lecture is hosted by ISTAC IIUM and will be delivered by the Honorable Professor Emeritus Tansri Zulkifli Abdul Razak, the Rector of IIUM, on the topic of youth well-being, social responsibility, and urgency of humanizing education. The special gathering today is indeed remarkable and provides a rare opportunity for government, civil society, universities, industries, and the community to come together for the purpose of betterment and empowerment of youth and society. This is yet another platform to exchange ideas and views on the way forward for youth well-being. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, I would like to thank Professor Ismi and Professor Haslinda and their team for the great effort and support. In ISTAC, IIUM here, I would like to thank Madam Zureida and her team for the wonderful job and collaboration resulting in organizing our event today. Thanks also goes to Professor Emeritus Tansri Dato Zulkifli Abdul Razak for his support and guidance and readiness to deliver the second distinguished lecture. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Abdul Aziz, for the speech. Ladies and gentlemen, to continue our event today, let me invite Professor Dr. Ismi Arif Ismail, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Academic and International, UPM, for his welcoming remarks. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato' Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Director of International Islamic University Malaysia, His Excellency Professor Dr. Abdul Aziz, Professor Dr. Haslinda, the management of ISTAC and the management of IPSAS, UPM, professors, academicians, participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good day. On behalf of UPM, I would like to thank IIUM as our close partner, not only for this event, but for future collaborations. I would like to thank Prof. Aziz for making this a reality. I remember we came early of the year to discuss about the possibility, of having such an event like this, and also other, efforts in the forms of research, publication, and so forth. Because I believe we have to complement one another, In IPSAS, we work closely on looking into youth and community well-being, and we know the strength of ISTAC. And we believe that this joint effort, will create wonders for the betterment of the nation and the Ummah, inshallah. So the program, I think it has been covered by Prof. Aziz just now. So I will just go quickly to just recap that the program will address a broad range of issues related to youth well-being, covering social, political, economics, spiritual, moral, and so forth. And we hope that this program will generate an awareness on the pressing issues related to youth well-being and their societal roles and responsibilities. We also hope that this program can cultivate ideas and solutions to issues affecting youth well-being and engagement. And the program will also provide platform for leaders, scholars, youth to share their thoughts and views on youth well-being. So in our discussion earlier on, we talk about inviting eminent speakers who can share their thoughts and wisdom as the way to generate ideas to address current problems, challenges, and potentials for youth, not only in Malaysia, but also across the globe. So I hope we are going to have a very fruitful session today, and we are very thankful to Emeritus Professor Tan Sri Dato' Zulkifli Abdul Razak for having your time with us today. We look forward to listening to you, and inshallah, hopefully we can nurture a better society, not only for Malaysia, but also for the world, insyaAllah. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Ismi, for your welcoming remarks. Members of the floor, we will now start with the highlight of our event today, which is the second distinguished lecture series on youth well-being. As mentioned previously, the topic of today's lecture will be on youth well-being, societal responsibilities, and the urgency of humanizing education, which will be given by our honorable speaker, Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Datuk Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of IIUM. Without further ado, it is a great honor for me to invite our moderator of today's session, Assistant Professor Dr. Ahmad El Muhammadi, and our honorable speaker, Tan Sri Datuk Zulkifli Abdul Razak, to the stage. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And very good morning. First and foremost, let me welcome all of you to this second distinguished lecture series on youth well-being, entitled Youth Well-being, Social Responsibility and Urgency of Humanizing Education. So, this forum or this discussion this morning is going to consist two parts. First is the presentation by the Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Datuk Zulkifli Abdul Razak, and after that we are going to have a discussion and question and answer session. So let me welcome all of you to this event, especially the representative and also student leaders from IPSAS and His Excellencies and all these distinguished participants to this event. So I hope that we can take this opportunity to have a meaningful discussion and engagement with our distinguished speaker today. So as I said, the topic is about youth well-being. So here we have two generations. One is Professor Emeritus Tan Sri, and the young leaders, I would say. I would say, when we look at these programs, it reminds me of one phrase that I read before. The foundation of civilization is actually built on our ability to learn the wisdom of the elders and the strength and energy of the young people. So I think today, combination between the wisdom of the elders and the energy of the young people is going to create wonders, as Professor Ismi said. So without any further ado, let us dwell for a while to listen the wisdom of our elders. So Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Datuk Zulkifli Abdul Razak, as all of you know, is the Rector of International Islamic University Malaysia, and he has an extensive experience dealing with various range of issues. If you listen to, I don't have to introduce him to all of you. I think if you listen to what he's going to say, you are going to know the extent of his knowledge and experience that he has. With honor and privilege, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you, sir. Please.
Thank you. Can I use it?
Yes, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin wa salatu wa salam syafil anbiya musallin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Excellencies, moderators, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Let me first of all thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving me this opportunity to meet you. I feel a little bit nervous today because most of my audience are very young. I don't know what to tell them. I used to be a youth at one time, if you could believe me. And I don't have any other experience, scholarly or otherwise, to talk about this topic, except that I've been forced by the Dean to do so. So I will use my experience 40 years ago, perhaps, when I was a youth, and how do I actually mediate and navigate life. And maybe we can exchange a little bit of what your experience would be and what mine is, so that we can come to a kind of understanding, what can we do for the world today as part of youth and my generation. I also must confess that my generation has not done very well. in terms of, navigating into the future. You can see the kind of problems we see today, and part of it is because we have not done our work very well. And therefore, talking to you today means a lot of things so that we can share notes, compare what is possible, what is not possible in the context of moving into the future. I've given this title, Youth Wellbeing, Social Responsibility, and the Urgency of Humanizing Education. Humanizing education is a word that we have coined for ourselves at IIUM so that we can restructure again education to what it should be. Education has been here for a long time, but I have my doubts whether education that we are doing today is really education. I think it is not, in the sense that we have not got the kind of feedback that we want from a real kind of education, where social responsibility is one of the utmost outcome of education. We see there's a lot of problems now in the social structure, and therefore I begin to question whether education is education, or is it just another upskilling, or is this another just way of getting jobs, or making, some sort of an external contribution without realizing what education is all about. And this is where we're going to talk about this, right? If I can get this to work, right? I would like, first of all, to welcome you. I think this place is our pride and joy for IIUM, and certainly from Malaysia as well. The architectural, I think, is a very Islamic architecture done by the founder at that particular time, and you can see how beautiful this building is. And if you're just wondering why are you sitting here in a place like almost like a cathedral, yeah? And I asked this question, why is this building almost like a cathedral? The answer that came was this is how the Islamic sitting was at that particular time. It was taken by another civilization, another culture, to make it their own. I mean, this is something which is very, very important for me, that we as Muslims can provide solution, can provide models, and can provide examples to other cultures at the same time. And there are many examples that we can think of. And I hope this lecture today, or the dialogue today, will resemble that. What is it that we Muslims can give other people rather than just borrowing, taking on others' idea as though that we do not have an idea that is originally of our own? This building exhibits many of these things. Everything that is in this building, I think, has its own idea, has its own model, and has its own purpose. And I think this is what I think we are very proud of this building, as it were. So welcome to this building. I think if you have time, do explore it, particularly the library. The library is one of the remarkable sort of a presentation of libraries in this country, if not throughout the region as such. Yeah? Now, let me go into the title proper. When we talk about well-being, how do I understand well-being? Well-being is an English word, right? And an English word do not actually translate very quickly into what the locals mean. What is well-being in Malay, in Bahasa Malaysia? Because we need to understand that in our local context, then it has a meaning to us. Yeah? In my case, when I talk about well-being, I talk the word sejahtera. Sejahtera is what well-being is all about. And if I translate sejahtera into what it means, it is almost a composite of many things. So here it is essentially a state of being for the whole human person. It is not just part of it, but it's for the whole human person, the entirety of that person itself, although we are broken up into parts. Yeah? And why this is important? Because at the end of the day, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In other words, you may be good in your hand, you may be good with your head, you may be good with your legs, you may be good with your heart. But if you cannot assemble these into one whole to make you a human being, then it is no good to be just good in parts rather than the totality. And therefore, to understand well-being is to understand that the total human being itself. Who is it that we are talking about, and who is it that we are trying to make as far as the future is concerned? Yeah? So for this particular lecture, we will then look at it at least in 4 dimensions. We talked about intellectual part. In university, I think that's one of the foremost things. We also want to talk about the physical part, because without the physical being, the intellectual being does not mean much. We also want to talk about the emotions and also the spirituality, the two ideas that is not very well taken up in education system, at least in Malaysia. We are so used to learning to do, means the physical part, or learning to know, which is the intellectual part. We are not good at learning to be and learning to live together. These are the 4 pillars of learning that UNESCO always talks about. Yeah? In Malaysia, we are good at learning to do, learning to know, but we are not too good about learning to do and learning to be and learning to live together. And this is where the idea of social responsibility come into the picture. Unless we can get this into a whole, then you will not get the whole person. So we often talk about economic well-being, for example. It doesn't mean much unless the rest of the other well-being follows through. You can talk about intellectual well-being. It doesn't also mean much if emotionally you are not there. Yeah? You can talk of physical well-being. Also, it doesn't mean much if there is no other supporting ideas about well-being is in the total perspective of this. Yeah? So that is important. I think we want to look at this as a way how to move forward. And if you take it just on every part, then it becomes a reductionist sort of understanding. I think this is where we are besetted by many of these issues, that most of the things that we talked about are very reductionist. It is not holistic in this sense. We want to talk about how we can make into a total human person, as I've mentioned to you. So that is important because then we need to how to relate to your environment. That whole human person, what sort of relationship do we have with the community? What sort of relationship do we build among ourselves? What sort of relationship do we have with the environment? Yeah? What sort of practical solutions that we are going to look and solve as far as responsibility is concerned? Yeah? What sort of structure that we need to create to make that human being or the total human person works? And at the end of the day, what I mean to say was basically, if you talk about the total solution, then we must be able to have your relevance in society, in the community as such. And this is, again, talking about how do we focus not only on the context of well-being, but the context of well-being, this is sustainable. In other words, there is a point of resiliency. You know how to cope. Given the pandemic, how do we cope? Are we resilient in this particular context? Not just a question of economics, whereas education now, I think, has been reduced to very much just an economic outcome, rather than talking about the whole that I was mentioning earlier. So this idea of being a total human person, which have its own set of well-being, must be then translated into how the society benefit from it. If we are not able to translate that, then I think this idea of well-being is not complete in itself. I want to quote this in the Geneva Charter of Well-being, which is drafted by UNESCO organization. They talk about a well-being society, and these are the words that they use. Yeah? Creating a sustainable well-being societies committed to achieving equitable health now and for the future generation without breaching ecological limits. In fact, if you talk about the question of climate crisis now, we talk about the question of global warming and all the other disasters that we see, including the very latest in Batangkali, it all relates to this. In other words, at that particular point, the society has no resemblance of what well-being is all about, because there is no equitability in this particular sense, and at the end of the day, it becomes a hazard to us, it becomes harmful to us, because we have transgressed the limits of ecological wants. I think this is an idea that I think we need to base in the talk, keep in mind when we talk about well-being in a particular context of moving forward in creating a well-being society, which is, I think, the final outcome of any good education system. So in that context, then we'll talk about social responsibility and humanizing education as the pathway, as the road to in creating these sustainable well-being societies and equitable health, and also living within that limit of ecological system. If that is how we understand it, at least that's how I understand it, yeah, then where can we go from this? I think we didn't begin to look at what is the status of the world today. The reality check is that the world is not sustainable, and that's why we have the Sustainable Development Goal. and it is also imbalanced. Again, we can see that, yeah? There are many people who are suffering, but there are few people who are actually benefiting from those sort of tragedy around the world. So I would probably state that in the context of the world today, we are in a state of inequitable standing as far as humanity is concerned, as far as the world is concerned. Yeah? I'll give you a simple example. The simple example is when we start to compare between nations and regions and countries, this is again what we see. We find that the United States of America, that everybody wants to be, right, is living on the resources of 5 planets. Bear in mind, we've got only 1 planet. If one country have got more than 1 planet, then they must have stolen or borrowed or steal or whatever it is from another part of the world. So if a country has got excess of 4 planets to live on, then there must be something that is inequitable in that particular respect. Yeah? And this is, I think, a question that needs to be realized. If you have taken something from somebody else, then you need to return it. I just read, I think, a news yesterday that the Dutch government, or I think the Dutch Prime Minister, has already made an apology for creating slavery in the world for the last 250 years. These are the kind of issues that we need to come back to when we talk about equitability. These are the kind of issues that we need to come back to when you talk about the whole human person, because everybody else is the same. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter who you are entitled to the same treatment throughout the world. So if you've got extra 4 planets, what happened to the people who are deprived of these 4 planets? And that's not the only one. If you look at Canada, for example, they've got an excess of 3 planets. They're living on resources of 4 planets. Yeah? And so on and so on and so on. And if you take here, is the comparison is Thailand. Thailand at that particular time, 2008, is living on the resources just like other countries ought to, which is only 1 planet. So this is already in itself inequitable. So everybody wants to go to the United States of America. Why? Because they've got these excess planets. You give me the planets, another 4 planets, I think I can be United States of America the next day. There's no magic about this. The moment you have your resources afforded to you, then you can do the things that you ought to do, but you cannot because the resources are not there. And many developing countries, many developed countries, many Muslim countries are suffering because of the inequitable resources distribution, as it were. So if you look at this map, then you begin to realize where the inequitability is. And therefore, it affects well-being in this particular respect. The green colors are the colors that is called, quote-unquote, developed country. The red colors are the least developed countries, and the orange ones are in between. If you can count them, you find that there's a lot more countries which is deprived. Why? The reason was in the last slides, because your privileges, your rightful resources are taken up by somebody else, and somebody else now is telling you what to do. But this is the whole idea of when we talk about well-being. It is not about us. When we translate into societal well-being, then the whole gamut of issues needs to come into play. And this is where I think the awareness, as far as youth is concerned, needs to be brought up at to speed so that we can understand the problem and look for the solution the way it ought to be. I just want to give you a kind of a process. How do we end up into this inequitable sort of world, as it were? So if we can go back maybe into the 1700s or 1800s, when the world is more agrarian in itself, yeah, the kind of scenery of that nature. We still have our rivers, we still have our forests, we still have the nature around us the way it is. Yeah? There may be pollution, but it is not as agonizing as it is today. Yeah? And this is where we started. Many of our countries started like Malaysia started like this before it becomes an industrialized, quote-unquote, nation. But beyond that, when we start to look at what happened before, after that, we begin to see the graph that is drastically different. From the year 1750, which is the year that marks the so-called first industrial revolution, we begin to see things are growing into an exponential growth. And this is now still ongoing, and then you begin to translate this into what we call the Industrial Revolution. Most of you talked about the Fourth Industrial Revolution because the government wants to join the movement of Fourth Industrial Revolution. Nothing wrong with that. But you need to understand what is the relationship with the Fourth Industrial Revolution to the previous three revolutions, 1, 2, and 3. Because these are a continuum. It is not an episode in itself. The Fourth Industrial Revolution will not happen if there's no First Industrial Revolution. And if there's no second, if there's no third industrial. So what is the consequence of this continuum to the world? At the end of the day, what sort of well-being society are we creating? So it is quite easily seen here that we are going into this exponential growth, and this exponential growth, I think, arrives at the making of the so-called industrial society. Whether it's well-being or not is a question that all of us need to answer at a later stage. Yeah? There are other industrial, invention, the steam engine, the factories, electricity, and also the computerization. These are all the mix-ups of the industrial revolution that makes us into what we are today. In the context where we're being otherwise, depending again on how you define this. Right? But what is important, I think, by the year 1950, right, we call this the Great Accelerator. In other words, from 1950 onwards, everything is going to go more exponential the way it is, right? And you begin to see some of the developments as far as the youth is concerned. In the year 2019, there is an article in the Time magazine that talks about the me generation. And these are the so-called the millennials. We'll talk about the millennials in a while. And these are, I think, the generations that belongs to you. My generation perhaps is a baby boomers. Your generation is the more of the millennials. And what is the millennials in this particular sense? They have got a different way of thinking. And in this particular context, I think there is a quote, if I can read it here, in this magazine that talks about 40% of the millennials, at least according to this Time issue, believe that they should be promoted every 2 years regardless of performance. In other words, they're taking things for granted. They almost own whatever there is, and they must get their rights to do certain things. Whether they perform or not perform is not an issue. Yeah? You may be a little bit agonized by this, but this is, I think, maybe in the context of the Americans, I'm not too sure. So we need to introspect this and look whether Malaysians are also like this, or other peoples around the world are also like this, or maybe they have got their own cultural ways of looking at it. But whatever it is, it becomes something that is now you begin to be very obsessed with yourself. The well-being society is no longer important as long as the well-being is just within you and the context between you and the society is not clear anymore, right? And we begin to analyze then this whole generation, you see the millennial will be somewhere, I don't know whether I can use this. Yeah. This is where the millennials are. Yeah? This other generation. And we can see all these generations have their own way of looking at things and how they want to perceive the future. And that's where the takeoff point is. How do you look at the future? What is your role in the future? And what can you do for the society to create that particular future? And if you go on and understand this a little bit more, you begin to see that these are what I call the generation accelerator. They are the one that are going to push the growth upwards and upwards and upwards. And we know from the law of nature, anything that goes up must come down. And I think we are now about going down. We are about to go down after the pandemic. And you can begin to see what are the kind of problems that we need to deal with and what are the kind of solutions that we need to create. And therefore, this is your role, particularly for the youth of the future, to find out what is doable, what is not doable, and how we can save the world as it were. That would be the kind of education that we'll be looking forward. No longer just about us, no longer just about our country, but we're talking about humanity and the world per se. There's already a book And this book, I think if you have time, you might as well want to read it. A small book, yeah, that talks about the collapse of the Western civilization, written by two prolific writers. One is Noemi Orokes, which is now, I think, in Harvard, and the other is Eric Conway, which is a journalist. And what is remarkable about this book is that if we continue the way we do things, as though things has not changed, then he said the world will collapse, or at least the Western civilization will collapse by the year 2093. They're very specific about this. Before the century is out, the civilization will collapse. And you can imagine, if the civilization collapses, then what will happen to it? And this is where the word Anthropocene comes in. Anthropocene is now used to describe the group of people, which is us, now trying to deconstruct our own civilization. The era before this is what's called the Holocene era, where we built civilization the way it is. But now, because of some issues, that we will discuss that later, we are beginning to deconstruct civilization. And the whole idea of civilization, as far as this institute is concerned, is important because this is an institute of Islamic thoughts and civilization. If you cannot defend civilization, then I think this institute also have got a problem. IIUM. UPM wants to be this university of international repute, but IIUM's vision is to create better human life and civilization. Another big sort of agenda that we need to think of just beyond IIUM. We talk about humanity, we talk about other people at the same time, Muslim or non-Muslims. We talk about lives, not only human lives, but lives of animals, of other environmental creation by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is where I think the challenge becomes important, at least for the youth who understand what the future will be like when we talk about the collapse of a civilization. And there are many civilizations that has collapsed, by the way, as we go on understanding it. So there is a disconnect from my point of view, where we understand where do we need to go as far as the future is concerned. What sort of well-being are we going to talk about? And how do you put this as part and parcel of education so that we become the generation that is aware of our responsibility and putting it in place in trying to save humanity in a go. What we have seen, that the conventional development that comprises of economic growth and economic growth alone, yeah, be it prosperity at the same time, driven by industrialization and commercialization, is now recognized to be toxic to humanities and planet. Global change, climate change, global warming, and all those other things that we've been talking about are examples of this. We can go into town in trying to enumerate some of this. But certainly the models are no longer working. The models need to be replaced. The only way to replace it is through education. But the question is, what sort of education do you want to replace this with? I just want to go very, very quickly on this. These are different. I also want to bring this whole idea, the understanding of the millennials differ from place to place. These are examples. Yeah? In China, they talk about different way of looking at it, different places. And in Malaysia, do we talk about the millennials the way the Times talked about it? In other words, we need to understand our own generation, our own value, our own civilization, our own norms, to understand who we are, rather than just following another sort of American jargon for this. And most of us seems to be bought into this. Everybody wants to claim their Generation Z, Generation Y, Generation X. I'm not too sure whether we actually are into those kind of generations, or do we have a different way of looking at it. And these are examples of people defining it differently so that they can find a different route out, rather than get stuck with somebody else's sort of jargon and also sort of a thinking process. Yeah? But what is certain, after the pandemic, most generations will undergo what we call the mental health pandemic. In other words, the issues now is no longer just outside there in terms of pollution and refugees and so on. The problems now is within us. And that's where the emotion comes in, and that's where the spirituality becomes important as an added dimension to what the future would bring to us. Yeah? At a glance, as I've mentioned, there are many ways of demarcating this. If you look at the millennials, as it were, They have got different ways of looking at it. A nice comparison that I managed to find. If you talk about my generations, we would rather to be left alone. You know, those group of people are very reflective people. They want to see and understand what the future. Histories are written by many of them as to what the future is all about. You move on to the baby boomers. You want to be, you want to be in contact with one another through writing. Understandable, because there's no other way of communication. All right? Then comes the other generation. Writing is no longer important. You want to be on a phone call. Right? The other generation will say email. No more phone calls. And the other generation talks about text me. So the way people communicate and the way people get their understanding of what well-being differ from generation to generation. All right? And as you can see, as I've mentioned just now, these are people who are affected by mental health and emotional issues. The way they communicate becomes an absolutely important way of understanding. The likes, or whatever you want to call it, in terms of making relationship and making contacts with other people is an issue that we see today. Here, you have two mechanisms which we do not know, at least my generation do not know. Right? The handphones, the internet, and we are just beginning to learn about this. My daughter and my sons are better in this, yeah? And then the other generations are even more sophisticated, the clouds and so on and so forth. All this, at the end of the day, gives you an impression of what well-being is all about, defined by somebody else. Some people say, I need all these connections because it will give me a kind of a satisfaction of being together with them, right? But studies tells us we can only manage no more than 150 connections at any one time. So you have 2 million followers. It doesn't mean much to us if you can't manage 150 connections the way we could as a human person. Those are issues, I think, that we need to come up to and understand it well. Idea basically is what Peter Drucker said long before all this came out. Yeah? And I like this quote. He said, we are becoming aware that the major questions regarding technology are not technical, but it's a human problem. There you are. It goes back to us. It goes back to how we understand ourselves. It goes back to how we then associate and relate this to the community around us. We are the source of the problem, not the technology. The technology can be what it is if you understand and know how to manage it. And I'm going to use this as how we then need to elaborate into the future. Let me try and illustrate this. When we talk about Industrial Revolution 1, 2, 3, and 4, we always talk about the benefits of it. Certainly there are benefits. Steam engine bring a lot more economic productivity. People move from place to place. Speed, it becomes no longer an issue. People can get in contact with one another by traveling through the steam engine. But what most of us do not mention or do not even want to mention is basically this. How many of us, when you talk about the first industrial revolution, talk about the pollution that it creates? Very few. We don't realize the downside. And this is the downside that at the end of the day will come and eat up the so-called well-being as far as human being is concerned, right? And then we moved on to the second industrial revolution. More smokes, more pollutions, when you have all this, what you call, factories coming up, yeah? And not only that, we begin to also pollute the weather with acid rain and so on and so forth. Again, the impact on well-being is very direct. But nobody even attributes to this because we look at this as something which is almost negligible because we are only focusing on the good part of this, right? We realize this, and therefore now we work on a clean sort of industry. What is a clean industry? This is a clean industry. No smokes, but there you are. Again, that's us. People, I always make this kind of a comparison with the university. The one that is in white is your lecturers. Yeah? You are the one that been produced on the conveyor belt. Yeah? It becomes so mechanical. There's no reflection, there's no thinking, there's no many of the things that education would demand. We talk about speed in education today, right? Education is not about speed. Education is about reflection, about thinking, about coming up with a solution that is well reflected on. It's just like the Industrial Revolution. Nobody has thought through the Industrial Revolution. If you have thought through the Industrial Revolution, maybe we say, okay, let's stop at this point because it will then pollute Earth and it will also kill us at the same time. But no, in this particular case. That's the third Industrial Revolution. And therefore, I go back to the quotation that I mentioned to you. The conventional development through industrialization and also commercialization has got its own toxicity as far as human and the planet is concerned. And these are, I think, the real stark reality examples that we are now seeing almost every day. Patangkali will remind us again and again and again where we have failed in trying to do the protection that we need to do. And therefore, then we become, there's a source of a social revolution. This is where social responsibility comes in, all right? And people are talking about profits, people are talking about power, and people are talking about where is the human dimension in this? How do we make amends to this? And that's the role of you and me. How do we shape this, or how do we reshape this for the future? Simple example, I think as early as this year, we find that loneliness now becomes a problem. Forget about pollution. But loneliness now becomes a problem. Aging now becomes a problem. Isolation now becomes a problem. You do not know how to cope. When our students, at least my students in IIUM, when they were locked down for 2 months, they don't know how to respond to this. Some people go into suicide tendencies, depression, and all those other things that we talked about. And the studies have shown that for the last 43 years, it says there's been an increase in loneliness. And this is, I think, following the kind of industrialization and commercialization that depends entirely on technology without the human source or without the human dimension attached to it. So to see this, whether it's real or not, this is statistics, I think, from World Economic Forum 2020, and when they talk about 35% will be on mental health. The rest are the same thing, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular, respiratory. These are the general non-communicable diseases. What is new in its entirety is 35% will be mental health. I think out of this, there are 200 of us, 70 of you maybe we're facing the same thing. And we do not know this, because mental health is not like cardiovascular or respiratory that you can see the symptoms almost immediately. You can feel it. Mental health, you probably will not. Yeah? And where are the tests for this? Yeah? And again, that the structure will tell you that at the age of, if I can read this correctly, yeah, at the age of the youth age, you find that mental health is a lot more compared to the physical health. Physical health, old people like me. You can't hear, you can't see, you know, all these are wear and tear. But for you guys, you are here. You can see the mental health hits at the very core when you are growing up to be an adult. And that is the difference between your generation and my generation. My generation at that particular time, we are still happy-go-lucky. Yeah? Because all the problems that I recite to you do not exist during my time when I was a youth. Yeah? And therefore, what grows into our brain becomes an issue. The depression, the stress, the anxiety, and so on and so forth, that nobody actually bothers. If you go to university now, they want to know whether you've got all the other diseases, but nobody measures about mental health. Only now we are trying to do that, and you're going to do that very, very slowly because we have no experience on how to do this. Yeah? So the issue becomes very, very clear. And if you want to see the numbers, I will present you the numbers, again, coming from World Economic Forum 2020. On the basis of it, it looks good. Child mortality is down, all right? But once they are surviving as a child, then you begin to see all the problem. 16 trillion, the estimated cost of mental health issue in lost output between 2011 and 2030. 16 trillion, already lost in outputs. The amount of global economic burden for non-communicable diseases accounted by mental health, 35%, as we mentioned just now. Yeah? 50% of all mental health disorders develop before the age of 15, before you even go to secondary school, you already harbor a kind of a mental health issue then. Yeah? 75% of all mental disorder develop by the age of 25. I think most of us here are about 25. Yeah? So already you are in that kind of a statistics, right? 800,000 people die by suicide annually. WHO says 4 seconds, I think. There's one people who kill themselves every 4 seconds in the world. All right? Majority are young people, your category again, right? And 90%, I think 9 out of 10, young people live in low middle income resources. And these are developing countries that we talk about, the orange color or the red color in the map that I gave you. But it is not there. I think because it's a human problem, it attacks everywhere and anywhere, and we are beginning to see them in many high resource settings. The green in the map that I showed to you, a young mental health approach has emerged and importantly gained traction. So it becomes a global problem. It's a matter of time, it becomes a global problem. Okay? Let me try and end this by talking about the fourth industrial revolution. We talk about the fourth industrial revolution, but how many of you have read this book? There's an important book to understand what the fourth industrial revolution is all about. Yeah? The takeaway from this book by the author is this. It says the fourth industrial revolution will affect the very essence of the human experience. The very essence of human experience to me is the fitra. Technology is going to affect that now. And these are the words of the author itself. It's not my word, right? If you go on to another brilliant scientist, Stephen Hawking, who just passed away about a couple of years ago, he says the development of full artificial intelligence, which is part of the fourth industrial revolution, could spell an end of the human race. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Yeah? In other words, you are creating something that at the end of the day will see your demise. Would you create something like that? But we do not understand this. And therefore, we keep on creating. We put heaps of money to do artificial intelligence. But what is the consequence of artificial intelligence? If we were to follow what Stephen Hawking says, we will probably be just creating a way to kill this human species over a long period of time. So because of this, I was touched by it. I wrote my other book. Nothing like shops, but trying to, And I say there is a dilemma in this. When we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, there is a dilemma. What is a dilemma? The dilemma to me is quite clear that we talk about how do you balance between human needs and technological needs. In other words, are we going to do education that is technocentric? Everything else will be wired. Without wire, it will not work. How do you teach adab using online thing? How do you teach something that integrity? How do you do it online? Or do we talk about human centricity as the outcome of education, which we talk about humanizing education? Yeah? Or put it another way, do we talk about just high tech without high touch? In other words, no values attached to it. Or the values, if there is also a very superficial values, not the core values of a human person. And the understanding of the so-called new normal. Everybody talk about new normal. We are in the new normal, we are in the new normal. What is the new normal? This is not the new normal, because new normal, everybody needs to wear a mask now. New normal means you cannot sit very closely to one another. Aziz, you're not pressing new normal. So what is a new normal? Do we go on doing this, or do we go on doing something else that people define as a new normal? Do we understand what this new normal is all about? Because that has an impact of how do we educate ourselves. Social distancing and physical distancing, they are two different things. What is it that we want? We want social distancing or we want physical distancing? In IIUM, we want physical distancing, but with social bonding, not social distancing. But yet you go anywhere around the mall, they talk about social distancing still, despite their understanding or the misunderstanding of that term. Yeah? Because at the end of the day, we are talking about this cliche, no one left behind. Everybody must be on board. everybody must be equitable, and so on and so forth. How do you make this happen if you cannot even understand the very nature of the fourth industrial revolution and the setbacks that it brings with us? Yeah? So we need to begin then, what I say, begin to understand humanity and planet again, and in our context, in IIUM, we talk about humanizing education, or the Rahmatan lil Alamin. The Rahmatan lil Alamin will take everybody into consideration, Muslim, non-Muslim, human lives or animal lives, and the environment, and so on and so forth. That is as far as the starting point is concerned. How many more minutes do I have? Huh? Okay, thank you. All right. So, what is the consequence of the fourth industrial revolution? First industrial revolution, second industrial revolution, we know. The pollution. And the pollution that we see today was the result of 300 years ago. And therefore, we are not able to solve that. Be frank about it. People make promises, guess that nothing will happen. Right? It's a 300-year-old problem because we have compromised some of the things that we ought to be thinking about. The third industrial revolution, okay, we minimize some of the pollution, although it's still there, but we've got another problem called loneliness. We are not going to solve that problem either, because now we find that it is not well developed, it is not well understood, it is not very sophisticated as compared to the other money-making medical sort of venture. Cardiovascular, respiratory, ONG, and so on and so forth. Psychiatry, nobody cares. That's already a problem that we need to deal with. Now, the fourth industrial revolution, what does it bring? We are beginning to talk about the transhuman. What is a transhuman? A transhuman is a combination between technology and the human person. You can see some of this. Yeah? You're talking about the meta brain. Now we can change your skin to artificial skin. You can change your kidney and all those robotic things. This is done. All right? That will be the future. And that future is what we call today the transhumanism. And the transhumanism leads for 3S, which is super intelligence, super longevity. Some of my friends I know, they are transhumanists, and they think they will not die. Yeah? They're taking pills, and they're taking vitamins, and they're doing all sorts of things to make sure that they live as long as possible. Yeah? And they talk about super happiness. The kind of happiness is the happiness that is artificial as far as that is concerned. And this is something, again, that we need to talk about when we talk about Sejahtera. It is not just about a word. Yeah? To give you an example, for example, we know a lot more about heart transplant. There's so many things that have been done about heart, right? But there's something about the heart that we do not know, and that is the soul. And we are told, at least Islamically, the soul resides on the heart. Aziz, if I'm wrong, correct me. Hati, kalbu, is something that is so important to create that human person, the well-being that we talked about. And that resides in the heart. And how many of us actually do understand this? Where is in our education system we talk about the heart, the emotion, the spirituality, as I mentioned to you earlier. And therefore, if we are not careful about this, we will be living with these transhumans. Your generation, my generation, I may be gone by then. And people are already predicting by the year 2050, the transhumanists will be walking on the earth. They may be dumb, some of them. I know some of my friends now, they've got Bluetooth embedded in their body. They don't have to have another gadget. They themselves are part and parcel of the device. And this transhumanism is something that we, as Muslims, need to understand. Yeah? How do I deal with this group of people? What sort of values do they use? Okay? And therefore, we need to begin to understand this convergence of technology and the human person. It's okay about technology's convergence. We talk about this. And this is what we call the point of singularity, where the convergence actually takes place. I will not elaborate on that. But believe me, there's this point called singularity where this convergence takes place. But our convergence is more than that. Our convergence is about the technology and the person. And therefore, I'm going to coin a new thing called the human technology convergence. How many of us know much about this? When the machines and you interact and decides who you are and what you need to believe and how you're going to operate is something that the fourth industrial revolution will bring about, whether we like it or not. You might as well prepare for it. And are we ready for this? Is our education earmarked into this? Otherwise, I think Islam can be just an illusion if we do not understand this well. Yeah? Because it eats up into understanding the religion as such. Yeah? And therefore, the whole society that we talked about. And this is where the understanding of what the planet is for, why is it created, why do we need to maintain it, the way it is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes an important issue. It's not important now because nobody talks about this in the way it should be sort of spelled out. And hence humanity, because there's only a boat that we have. Yeah? And therefore the sharing of this, 4 planets, 3 planets, 2 planets, these are all not understandable because there's only one planet. I remember the former United Nations Secretary General talked, there's no plan B because there's no planet B. There's only one planet and we need to share. How do we share this one planet if some people take more portion than they need to and depriving millions of others and on the context of no one left behind. Yeah? And therefore, I think the whole idea of where we come in as a human person, and I symbolize that by this rotating heart, yeah? That we need to rotate around the world at the same time. We are not just in Gombak, we are not just in ISTAC, we are not just in Malaysia, we are not just in Russia, we are all over. How do you move this? And how do you make this conversion work? I think that's a question that we need to ask at the end of the day. And how many of us are asking this question and looking for the solution moving forward? So we think that we need then to humanize technology. In other words, to ensure that technology is for the benefit of human beings rather than the other way around, which is now, I thought, what it is. All of you have got a handphone. Fine. There? But do you know that each time you wake up in the morning, the first thing that you visit is your handphone? And you will visit that thing again 200 times in a day. Yeah? It becomes habitual. It becomes addictive. It becomes a master to your life. Now, no handphone, the younger generation will, at least in IIUM, you cut off the internet for one day, they will burn my office down. You know, if I want to get them, I give them a nice internet and I can sleep well. It's so simple to buy you. Just give you the technology that you're addicted to, almost like you're addicted to a drug, I give you a drug, that's it. And I can live a comfortable life. And this is what it makes us now. And because of this, there's also now statements. Over time, technology might start to change our own DNA, the essence of the human experience that Schock was talking in his book. Yeah? Our behavior and domesticated humans. We can, as far as I know now, we only domesticate animals. Now, technology is going to domesticate us completely. Therefore, the need of the hour is to take steps and to work on humanizing technology, which is part of humanizing education. How many of us are thinking or working in that direction and has the capacity to do so, right? So I would like to end just by talking about this new normal thing, because let's get this straight before we go into discussion. The new normal, as mentioned now, is about wearing masks. Yeah, it's about social distancing. Yeah, it's about what do you call taking temperature. It's about sanitizers. It's about eating good food. That is new normal. As it stands now, none of us are in the new normal. After this, you're going to eat more than just good food. We have durian, I think. Yeah? So are we in the new normal? Because unless you understand what new normal is all about, we are not going to do a good way of planning. Which direction are we going to take? Yeah? So what we see today, we want to get rid of all this. And I reinvent the word I call the renewed normal. In other words, we don't want to stay in an earth that is static with a mask on. We want to go back to the world that we know. the world that rotates, and in the right axis, and not left to right, but right to left, I think, or the other way around, counterclockwise. That's the renewed normal. That's the normal that we know. Yeah. Some people we want to call it by a new normal. I think it's not new. It's old. The world has been rotating that way. A new normal will be. That's a new normal. The world rotating the other way around. It's not possible. So the so-called new normal is the old normal. The way we used to be. And I want to make this point emphatic because that is what the human being. So which is which now? Which is the new normal? If that's the new normal, then to me that's the renewed normal. I want to live on a renewed normal so that when somebody walks with a mask in a bank, we call security because he could be a robber. Okay? Not the other way around. So we need to decide where do you want to take this on. And I think the renewed normal is about us, our fitrah, the way we make ourselves, yeah? And it is about the good old days. We want to return to that, rather than creating another normal which we do not know what this is all about, because the old normal, I think, is well defined in terms of values. As far as values, ethics then and ethics now does not change. Morality then and morality now do not change. Yeah? Values then and values now do not change. And this, I think, another problem that we need to think about when you talk about same-sex marriage and whether the marriage institutions are valid or not. These are the values that we need to go for. Because we understand what the old system and the old values are. Whereas when you talk about the new normal, so-called, nothing is certain. I know you know the word VUCA. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We cannot decide what is to happen because of the so-called new normal. Now we are talking about different variants now. Yeah? And how do you then go into this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. So as youth now, you need to decide what sort of world are you going into. The new, the old, or the renewed normal. The old and the renewed normal to me is almost the same. Unless we decide this, then we will not be able to plan well because our targets and our direction will be all over the place as such, right? And this is where my last few points is basically the whole concept of sustainable development comes in. Because sustainable development has defined itself in many ways. Yeah? It is coming from the slides of the United Nations itself. It talks about inclusion, that everybody must be on board in the same way that we want to move. Yeah? And sustainable, the question of equity, the question of transformation, the question of universal, but within our own context. This is very important. Malaysia likes to follow everybody else, but their own, they don't care. But we've got our own context that we need to decide what is it that we want and connect it to the world. Okay? We need to talk about a comprehensive, integrated, the holistic approach that we talked about as far as human person is concerned. Not part of the human person. Not just human capital, but the human person is left out. How do you do this so that we can be future-proof? And for that, my last point will be, there is one bit that is missing, and we call it spirituality. IIUM and the ISTAC are now talking about SDG 18, which is spirituality. And spirituality will have to connect all this because all human persons have got the spirituality idea within their own ambit and their own cultural dimensions. How do you do this is something maybe we can talk in that dialogue. Okay? I'd like to end by saying these are the goals that we talked about, and these goals are not easy because it has to be connected with one another. If we do education, yeah, if we do education, which is number 4, does this solve the problem of poverty? Does this solve the problem of hunger? Does this solve the problem of health? Does this solve the problem of gender equity? Does this solve the problem of climate change? Does it help animals below water and above land? If your education does not do that, then education is nothing. And I begin to feel that education is not doing that at the moment in time. How many of our students can talk about climate change and talk about it in a way that they want to solve problems? I don't think anybody, because we have not dealt this with them. How many of our students talk about poverty and have been in a state of poverty themselves? We talk about poverty and we learn about poverty in the library which is condition. And we think we know about poverty. The moment they go to the community and see what poverty is on the ground, then they say, my God, this is not what the textbook says. Because our context and what the textbook says is not the same. And this is where I think connecting the dots is the new education coming forward. And how many of us are ready for this? And is the system ready for this? And that's a question I think that we need to ask. And that's a question that I hope we can talk about when we have the dialogue later. So eventually, we then will move into this complete. So the human person now have the spirituality embedded with him, the environment, he understands himself, he understands the social dimension, and the transdisciplinarity that people are advocating to move forward, not just a single discipline. A single discipline will not be able to afford you that particular solution. And hopefully, at that point, we will then have this particular person in the context of well-being that is all connected as a whole person itself. And that whole person becomes the mark of the new generation moving forward in creating a well-being society and, in fact, a well-being world at all. So on that note, I stop. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I hope I make some sense. We can have some discussion on this. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your excellent, enlightening, but at the same time, I also feel overwhelmed with the challenge and issues that you presented just now. I'm sure the audience also feel the same. But right now, we've been listening to Prof. Zul talking about the challenge and the prospect of the world. I think it is the time for us to listen to what you think, the question and the observation that you have in your mind. So I would like to invite, ladies and gentlemen, you to ask questions and to share your observations. So we would like to start with the 3 questions first. Keep it short and sweet so that we can have more discussion and more engagement. So please.
Please be kind, don't ask difficult questions.
Yes. Okay.
Dear Rector, thank you so much for your lecture. I have 2 questions. My first question is, regarding humanization of education, there is the theoretical difficulty of defining what actually this human is in the humanization. Is it the abstract human of logical thought? Is it the ideological human of humanism? Is it the cultural human of multiculturalism? Or is it the sociological human of anthropology? In your opinion, what model or representation of human is needed for the humanization process? My second question is, starting with Google and now with social media, there has been an explosion of information available to users. Some analysts speak of problem of information overload, where there is too much information for users to properly process. Given this problem, do you think the fields of critical thinking, contextualized analysis, and linguistic proficiency, all of which can be imparted in university education, can help millennial users to navigate the global discourse by helping them dealing with information overload? Thank you very much.
Okay, I get the question from the moderator, and if I to respond the first question, we use the word humanizing education in IIUM to understand that we must understand who we are. I mean, in the words of UNESCO, as I've mentioned, to make it more global. Yeah, we can talk on the Islamic specifics later. Like I said, there must be learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together.
Would you repeat again, Prof?
Yeah.
It's very interesting key word that you mentioned. Learning to do, learning to learn.
Learning to do, learning to know. We are good at this. In all universities, we teach them and then they ask them to do things, right? But the other two things, which is learning to be. In other words, if you read what learning to be is all about, is to understand yourself first. To understand yourself as a human person, what are the shortcomings and what are the strengths. In other words, trying to understand your fitrah, who you are. The moment you understand who you are, then you can live together. If you don't understand yourself, it's difficult to live together. And I think these are the two things that is missing in our education system in Malaysia. I can say that in clear terms. I don't know about your other places, but these are the things that I think. So to understand who you are, in other words, before we become a good engineer, can we be a good human being first? Before we become a good politician, can we become a good human being first? Before we become a good father or a good mother, can we become a good human being first? At that level, if we can do that, then I think we solve probably more than half of the problems. Because of all has got the same principle, and this is where spirituality comes in at a later stage. That we know what are the demands of a human person. And we can, for those of you who are good in Islam, will probably be able to interpret this in a more sophisticated way. That we Muslims have got some demands on ourselves. And that demands must be part and parcel of the education that we need to know, not on the extreme side. I know sometimes we talk about Islam, the demands are, beyond than what we can imagine. So that's the first thing when you talk about education, humanizing education. So in IIUM, we have got a roadmap for this. Yeah, for the year we begin from the year 2020, now 2024, we are now trying to craft this. One of the roadmaps that talks about is how do students and staff work with the community. When we talk about well-being community, we are not just going to talk about things that is good within the university, yeah. But as university grows, ISTAC is known all over the world. Is Kampung Sungai Pusu known in Malaysia? Yeah. Is Malaysia known all over the world, but the people who makes Malaysia are not even accorded that kind of a privilege. So in IIUM, every student now must got a community to be engaged with. In other words, they learn how to live like a community. I think there's one of the educationists that talk about university actually is a mini example of how society works. Then you translate that experience into a larger society. If within the university itself it fails, then you have very little hope that it will work outside. Especially a university like ours, we have got 100 countries represented in that university. In other words, we are already a global citizen. But when I drop you somewhere in Europe, can you survive as a global citizen? Or are you still thinking about your Gomba or your Laksa or your thing? We cannot move beyond that. And that's what humanizing education means to us. How do you expand the full potential of a human person? That makes us a very practical problem solver when we have to meet the challenges. I think that's what it means to us. Yeah. So if you look at how we track this, now we find that the kuliah are working with one another for solving problems. Not just producing a paper to be published in a journal. You have a journal that has got impact factor of 10. During the interview, I will ask them, you've got an impact factor of 10, what is the impact on the ground? If the impact on the ground is 0, then you're still 0, because you have not contributed anything. You have not translated anything. UPM has said they have translated so much. Because at the end of the day, the beneficiary must be the society, this well-being society that we talk about, from that well-being person. If it's not, I think the deal is not done. Second question. Yeah, I think this is a difficult question. All of us are hooked up into a machine that sends you information whether you want it or not. You know? And some of us have a habit of looking into all those information that was given to us. It is when the newspaper came out some decades ago, the same question. Yeah? At that time when there was no information, people say there's no information overload. Now with newspaper, we have got information overload. But we know how to deal with information as far as the newspaper is concerned. We don't read everything in the newspaper. We just take the headlines that we want and then we read it, and the rest I think we will discard it. We should do the same thing with your handphone. You know what you want, and you know. This is where I think the focus of education becomes important. That you don't read anything that you don't want to read. The choice is still yours. The choice is not theirs. I know these clickbaits and stuff like that. You need to discipline yourself as to what you want and what is it that brings, good information to us. I think sometimes I think again for those of you, we read this dua from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give us a good information. And therefore you need to seek for the good information. You don't read all this garbage that comes out in social media. I'm very disappointed that the social media talks about anything that is positive mostly. Yeah? I remember there was one episode that I happened to remove a sign on the sajadah that people can pray, and some of the students captured it and put it on a Twitter, And I think we've got about 1 million people who circulate it around. But at the end of the day, that good gesture that I did was seen as something which is bad. Then they will criticize the mosque. I mean, it's a good thing that you do, then the mosque gets the hate, because why do the mosque allow this to do? What is the mosque people are trying to do? So we always find the negative parts of it. Rather than enhancing the positive, we always want to encourage the negative part. I don't know why. And that's what the social media is all about, as far as I can see. So I don't use social media. I think I can survive without the social media. If I want to go, I go into the mainstream media and find out whether what is right and what's wrong. So the discipline, and this is part of education. How do you select? There are thousands of books in this library. Do you read them all? You don't. You select them, and you know what you want. And to know what you want, I think, is a question that is important. The UNESCO's cliche moving forward, no, not cliche. The slogan to move forward, they said, the world we want. How do you create that the world we want? And that's where I think this discussion is all about. I hope I answer your question. I know you're from Peru, sister. Yeah? And I'm really very, very honored. Not many Muslim in Peru, and she's one of those who's studying at IIUM. And I hope, again, Peru, very close to United States of America, we know what's going there, and how do you also modulate that at the same time?
Yes, thank you very much. Well. Okay, right now, let us continue with more question then. Should I go down and collect the question myself, or? I can, yes, please, Prof. I think I should go down.
Okay, Assalamualaikum, Tan Sri. I have 2 simple questions. I hope it will not be difficult, So, based on your sharing, talking about the 2 individuals responsible for the education of our generation in Malaysia, what would be your advice to both Minister of Education and Minister of Higher Education with regards to the topic that we are deliberating today? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a tricky question. This may be my last talk. But thanks for that question. I think that's an absolutely important question. Yeah? If I were to go into a company, it's a Petronas, all right, I must know what is the philosophy of Petronas. If I go to Petronas and talk about selling chicken, they'll throw me out. Because they are not about selling chicken. Right? And it's the same thing. If you go to education in Malaysia, you must know what education is all about. And it's not an elusive question, because we have got our own falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, a national education philosophy. You want to come to ISTAC and you don't understand the philosophy of ISTAC, then you're wasting ISTAC's time and you're wasting your time. You might as well go to somebody. Somebody just wrote and said, this place is not for me. Okay, go. I'm not going to tell you stay, because you're going to cause trouble for us. Now, not only the minister, even the prime minister, do they understand what falsafah kebangsaan is all about? And I can vouch that prime minister do understand, because it was during his time as the Minister of Education in 1998, I think, that he started this whole project on falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. Yeah? Maybe all the previous Prime Minister does not have that privilege, but this 10th Prime Minister has got this privilege. And therefore, I do expect that his minister will promote this falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. In other words, the minister must understand what falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan is all about, what the national philosophy is all about. If we don't understand that, then this is where I think our education strays. And we look at somebody else's, or this university, world-class university, we follow that one. But their philosophy and our philosophy may not be the same. Yeah? And therefore, there's a mismatch between what they are doing and what we are trying to do. And then we go into this ranking game, like, crazy. The ranking game philosophy and our philosophy is not the same. Why are we wasting our time and be ranked number one, and our philosophy is thrown into the drain? That is not education to me. So it's quite clear that education must be contextualized, as I'm trying to mention, and that's what humanizing education is all about. And if I can just, maybe for the purpose of people who are not familiar with the falsafah, it's very simple. The falsafah say on the first statement, it has to be ongoing, it has to be integrated, it has to be holistic. Is our education ongoing or lifelong, holistic and integrated? No. The very fact that we have two ministries already tell me that you are not. Yeah? And then what it says, at the end of the day, what do we want to produce? We want to produce a balanced and harmonious human being. Are we producing that? We want to produce keboleh pasaran. God, what an ugly word. Yeah? But orang yang boleh dipasarkan ni balance ke? Are they balanced? If they are not balanced, you market them, then they do all sorts of corruptions and stuff like that because they don't have the fundamentals. But people who are balanced and harmonious will certainly be marketable, quote unquote. You don't have to market them. Because people were looking for this kind of people. Yeah? And that's the purpose of education. And how it is balanced is also spelled in falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. It has to be balanced intellectually, physically, emotionally, spiritually, the four things that I talked to you about. But is this happening now? It is not. What is the reason for this? Again, because we are not looking at the right understanding of what education is all about. Some university will not talk about spirituality because it's something to do with religion or something like that. Then we also will discard it. And where does this four coming from? There is an important statement. It comes from kepercayaan dan kepatuhan kepada Tuhan. Devotion and dedication to God. Not because this university does it, that university does it, this minister does it, that organization, no. It's you go back to the fundamental, what is it? And they use the word God. They don't use the word Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that everybody can interpret it in the spiritual sense. So you don't go wrong if you follow that dasar. And at the end of the day, dia kata, what do you get? You get kesejahteraan, exactly the well-being. Diri kita sejahtera. Bila diri kita sejahtera, kita boleh mensejahterakan orang lain. When you have experienced peace, then you can give peace to other people. If you don't experience peace, how can I give peace to you? And so people ask me, what is bullying all about? Bullying is about these people do not have peace in them. And all they know is to harass other people. And they're doing what they know. Why do you fault them? You teach them that. So these are the issues that I think we need to come out with. As a university, if UPM and IIUM can do this, I think we'll change the whole structure. But we need to have that rationale of this. At the end of the day, dia kata sejahtera diri itu akan memberi kemakmuran kepada keluarga, masyarakat dan negara. It will bring peace to the family, the society, and the nation. This is what the nation needs now. But the nation cannot do this without the fundamental of a philosophy. Yeah, we cannot be extracting education as though it comes from the thin air, or it's just because one university world class, therefore you pick it. No, it doesn't happen that way. So that question just now, thank you very much. I hope it's not a planted question. Yeah, but that I think is the purpose. Once you get that purpose in, I think we are now, and that's why sometimes also we ask for autonomy, so that we can do what we want to do, although the minister does not consent it, because the minister may not understand it, fine. But we need to do what we understand, because we are the academician, he is a policy maker. And we need to do this right the way we need to, put it for the younger generation. So you guys must demand for it. I mean, the younger generation must demand for it. If we don't demand for it, then nothing will happen. Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Any more? Can raise your hand.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So my question is about
Can you introduce your name, sir?
My name is Muhammad Azril MMB Azlan. So my question is about climate change due to greenhouse emissions. So according to our website, our World in Data 2021, animal agriculture that includes non-food products contribute 33% of greenhouse emissions. So my question is, does promoting eating less meat can help reduce greenhouse emissions? Thank you.
This, once again, this apa?
Yeah, I also do not get your question. Could you repeat again?
Does promoting eating less meat can help reduce greenhouse emissions?
Eating less meat.
Well, it depends. It depends on who you speak to. If you speak to the vegetarian, they will say meat is, meat is. But again, this is something that after the Second World War, all right, meat eating becomes an obsession, and that's again a Western tradition. All this steak business, we don't have that in our culture. Our culture is ulam. Our culture is vegetarian based. Of course, we have meat, chicken and stuff like that, but we don't eat a whole of meat and a little chips around it, and no, that is not our culture. So that kind of a culture, I think, has been imported into, and therefore we need to understand, again, that's why I say the context is very important. Why can't orang Melayu go back to the eating of ulam? Orang PM angguk-angguk. Yeah, because that's the culture. And the ulam that we eat is because of the medicinal purposes, not because of the flavor. And that's why kadang-kadang ulam tu pahit, because the ingredient, the what they call, I forgot the word for it. Benda tu menjadi ubat pada kita. So the philosophy of eating is another issue. This whole idea of fast food, it's not our culture. Our food is never fast. Our food is always very slow. So you make that kind of assumption, you must relate it back to the culture where it comes from. So now we have a whole industry grazing on a land because you want the meat, all right? And that is the issue that we want to talk about as far. So can that change? Can that change so that we find that everything else go back to the balance? I want to emphasize the word balance. Dalam hal ini, the word keseimbangan becomes important. Kesederhanaan becomes important. Wasatiyah becomes important. When you do something, it is in a balance. This is a binary world. You cannot say, don't eat meat, everybody eat vegetable. We have got other problems. So we need to find the balance where it comes from. To a certain extent, they are right, but how do you find a solution and a balance to this? Okay? But meat is the last. My problem is the car that you drive. That is a problem. The traffic jam that we feel, those are the ones that is causing the climate change. Forget about the cow. Let them live alone. You know, reduce the number of cars that we produce. Let the cow live. We can control that. I think we can do better. Yes, you want to follow up?
According to the website, the greenhouse emissions caused by agriculture animal is more than the transportation gas emissions.
Maybe. But like I say, if you were to control, it's easier to control the car than to control the animals. You know? So where you want to strike the balance, for example, in many settings, especially rural settings, they don't have the cars. That's why I say go back to the green, my graph 32. The people who are living on these resources of 5 planets, what do we do with them? Because if United States can reduce from 5 planets to 2 planets, I think you have saved a mass problem. What is the problem with that? I think that's the one that I think we need to focus on for the solution. Yeah? Okay, any more?
Let us move on. Yeah.
Thank you, bro. My name is Said Usman Gilani. I'm from Pakistan. I'm PhD student in ISTAC. Thank you very much for your distinguished lecture. You raised a point about transgenderism in your lecture. So this is a huge debate on this point in our country also, because there is some transgender bill in Pakistan is to apply or not apply. Can you put more enlighten on this issue? Then how, as a common people, we do with this kind of generation, with this kind of people, and what Islam says about this, because there is some classification. There is no just one transgenders. There are some classifications, some men, and in our fiqh we can say khunsa mushkil or al-mukhannas. There are some classifications. How do Islam says, and how do we react with these people, because their people are all over the world? So may I know what are Islam says and what are our...
Unfortunately, I'm not a good Islamic scholar. I'm not even a scholar. But certainly, when I talk about renewed normal, it's basically going back to what Islam advocates to us. We don't have to reinvent this. A simple example that I know for a fact is when you talk about the Prophet, he meant his own shoe. When your shoe gets spoiled, what do? You throw and buy a new one. So in other words, the practice that the Muslim does, the practice the Muslim at the point of Islam being understood the way it is understood. In terms of food, we are talking about food. The Prophet said, eat only 1/3. The other 1/3, fill it with water. The other 1/3, leave it empty. I think if we practice that, we probably have no problem of these gases or whatever we talk about. Gandhi said the same thing. Enough for everybody needs, not enough for everybody greeds. That's the renewed normal that I'm talking about. There's nothing to reinvent. It was there, it was culturally there, it was accepted then, but somebody has changed it because of the commercialization. Because of, you just need to talk about your what do you call, bottled water. How many brands of bottled water have we got? They're all the same bottle, you know. And we allow that because we talk about competition, we talk about whatever it is. But the question is basically we are adding a lot more things that we don't. We're adding more plastic to this. Yeah, we're adding a lot more wasted. I mean, for example, when I hope it doesn't happen during lunch, when you open your bottle, you pour for yourself, and you drink only 1/3 of the bottle. Who's going to finish the 2/3? You're going to throw it away. Our culture says, you share that first. One that's finished, you open the second bottle. So it's a question of how do you grasp with the values. I think this is not rocket science. But you need to teach them how to do this, how to take wudu without wasting water. In Makkah, you take wudu in a cup of, small cup, you do this, finish. But here you turn the tap and you take a bath, underneath, and still you're not happy. This way I say, when we go back to the renewed normal, go back to the essence of what the values are all about. Practice that. If you do that, alhamdulillah, we'll be okay. And that, of course, will follow many, many other things. The design of buildings, for example. Yeah? How do you design a building like this? Almost enclosed. Then we switch off the lights. Switch on the lights. You might as well design a building that is open to the sunlight and switch off the lights. And you save. So those are issues that I think we need to come back. So UNESCO are coming back to many of these quote-unquote indigenous way of looking. I think we have got a good project with UNESCO that see how the indigenous people live in the jungle without complaints. They don't care about air condition, they don't care. They know how to adapt. But why can't we? Because we have made our life so unpleasant for the, the community aside. And this is what I think that needs to be taught again. How do you look at, we are not saying follow one rule, but at least an alternative. What is the alternative that you have if you want to live this way and not the other way that we've been promoted? So TVs and stuff like that, it's advertisements. For the life of me, when I look at some of the advertisement deodorant, as long as your armpit smells okay, you're happy. And you've got advertisements for that. Is that life is all about? Just to make sure that your armpit doesn't smell, and then you're happy? They have now, everybody now buying that deodorant because this celebrity is doing that deodorant or buying that deodorant. So they have reshaped your thinking into something which is so superficial. Yeah? I think we need to be very introspective about this. Where are we going to go? What sort of values should we have? And go back to what I call the renewed normal. Old people say the old is already, the youngsters old, you're old, they don't want. I call it renewed normal so it doesn't sound old. But it is the old values that we want to promote again. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm Rahma Sharif from Libya. My question regarding to your, according to your opinion, please, I want to learn from experience. What is the meaning for University of the Future, and how University of the Future help provide the well-being for youth?
What is the future university look like, and what they can offer to the youth?
University of the Future. Yeah. Okay, good question. You must understand the history of the university. According to UNESCO, the only operating university that is now recognized in the world is from where? Anybody knows? It's in Fez, Morocco, University of Karayin, built at 859, I think, by a lady called Fatima Al-Feth. That is the first university. If people come to me and say, Muslims do not promote education among women, here is a lady that builds the first university in the world, recognized by UNESCO, not OIC. OIC recognized, I may be biased, but recognized by UNESCO. And this is a lady. Now, what sort of university did she build? Now, to start off with, when she built the university, she fasted all the way until the university is ready. It was then a mosque. No big deal. Yeah. Now, that's the kind of value you give to a university. How many of us fasted when IIUM was built for the many days? No, nobody. And here is a lady that fasted. And the money certainly comes from the father as initiated. And what is this university all about? It is about the person, not about the curriculum. It's about the person. How do you build a good Muslim? That was it. So now the direction is the same. For the last 3 years, we've been involved with it. when UNESCO organized a seminar called The Futures of Education. What are they talking about? They're talking about at least 3 or 4 things. One of the things they're talking about is not about livelihood anymore, it's about life. In other words, you go to university to learn about life, not livelihood. Right now, I go to university because I want to learn about livelihood. I want to go out and get my first Mercedes and big cars and big wife and big husband. You know, that's my ambition. When I got my big wife, big husband, and big car, I don't know what to do with it. You know, now the divorce rate goes high. And this is real. Already there's one statement that I read by the year 2030, 45% of the women will not marry. As a prediction. By 2030, 45% of the women in the world will not get married. Is this normal? Is this not normal? I'm not too sure. But if that's the kind of statistic that we see, what do we do with the universities? I know, for one, we need to increase the male population. The male population in university is going down. Yeah, I asked my student, why are you not married? He says, lack of quality men. Men, guys, do something, man. You know? So those are the issues that we need to tackle and find out what. So how do you build this for the future? So we're talking about life and livelihood. You have a good livelihood, but you have poor life. How do you balance these two together? Yeah? The other thing that we are talking about, meritocracy and potentialities. Now this ranking, because somebody is making money somewhere. But UNESCO has made a statement, it said, we are now going to look at potentialities rather than meritocracy. In other words, if I were to be a student, how do I increase my potentiality? I'm not going to compete with Ismi. He may be a better student than I am, that's okay. But I want to compete with myself. How do I become a better person as compared to what I was? And that's the potential. So there are many things now. I think there are 7 things. I cannot remember them all. But there are 7 directions that they are now talking as far as the university is concerned. No longer the way we see it today. And that includes also no more all in the classroom. People will need to go out of the classroom, meet with other people, talk to other people, and so on and so forth. How do we actually move this as part and parcel of the curriculum that we're going to design? Yeah? And how do you retrain the teachers? Most of us have got our PhD, but we have never taught in any universities, right? How do you bring this back and make sure that we are also part and parcel of that new change that we're going to go into? So, but this question of the future of universities has not been concluded. For IIUM, we have got our own roadmap, IIUM 2040. We know in 2040 where IIUM will be, all right? And then they will move on and on and on. So the whole forecasting of what the future will be like is something that is in your hand, not in anybody's hand. What is it that you want, and how do you make it happen? And that's what the education is going to be about, moving into the future. So this Malaysian, I was in Malaysian and Asian mentality, yeah, that you leave it only to the authority that we just follow is no longer the rules. The rule is we want you to lead, because your experience and our experience are not the same. You know what you want, and how do we facilitate it is a question I think that we need to come to terms with. Yep. Okay?
Okay, I think we can pick up one last question.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Adam Musa. I'm from Uganda. I would like to thank the rector for the wonderful presentation. And I urge all of us, we have an uphill task to make sure we improve on our well-being and more so in the education sector. Professor, you talked of fitra as humanness. I would like to provoke you, sir, allow me. As IIUM, the psychologists tell us education can be measured in 2-3 forms. There is IQ, EQ, and AQ. I don't know, I came recently and I saw there was a lot of convocation. In Uganda, we call them graduations, series of them in the week. So I'm asking Mr. Rector, sir, are you only taking care of the IQ, or you also have measurements which can be celebrated during the graduation on as to the EQ and the AQ? Thank you so much.
Okay, another difficult question. All right. I want to sit down for this one.
Okay.
Okay, you have to understand again the history of universities. University takes on in this measurement thing when the Industrial Revolution comes in, right? So from my point of view, the university is no more than a factory like they produce goods. If you look at your university, or at least our university, you are just like a factory. You came in as a what you call a raw material. You want to be engineer, you know nothing about engineering, right? So you come to the university, then we put you into a track called engineering, and we value add this engineering thing to you, okay? And we do that on year one, and then at the end of the year one, we have got an exam. In the factory terms, it's quality control. If you pass that quality control, you go to the second conveyor belt, called year two. If you don't pass the quality control, either we throw you out or we make you remedial work, and then you go. And you repeat that, year 3, year 4, year 5, and year 4, convocation, big deal. And you can see, even in IIUM, you can see the factory when they take this. Were you there in the last convocation? The people are one after the other, take the director give, come. Then the one I give, come. 800 times. You know, it's just like the factory that I showed you in the picture. You know, and at the end of the day, you are called what? Human capital. You are ready to be marketed. It's just like the slavery of the days. Now, what's your name? I say, I've got this guy here. You know, he's good and this, who wants to buy? And of course, it's not as blatant as that, but that's essentially what it is. All right? Now, the days before the Industrial Revolution came in, there's no such thing as measurement. We look at you as a human person in totality. If you're good at gardening, fine. But are you also a good father? Are you also a good brother? Are you also a good uncle? That human person is always there. You know, now it doesn't matter anymore. If I get CGPA 4, I can be the worst crooks, but nobody cares. 4.0 becomes important. They will find you in a crook when you go into a workplace and suddenly, hey, this guy steals money. Then they throw you out. So the Industrial Revolution again changes our understanding of what education and what measurement is all about. And it comes from a simple measurement principle. It says anything get measured, get done. If you cannot measure, it cannot be done. So everybody will just do something that can be measured. And if you ask them to do something that cannot measure, they will not. Simple example. If I ask them to do something that they cannot measure, then they say it's difficult to do. I think this is something that is now, becomes an issue as far as. So you want to talk about Iman. How do you measure Iman? We want to talk about Akhlaq. How do you measure that? You can't measure. So these are not actually taken into consideration as such. So we need to start, and this university, Alhamdulillah, university is doing another project. We call it the Communiversity. We've got 5 elements that we think we should be looking at, and this will hopefully redefine the university. UPM is part of this program. You've got UPM, you've got UNIMEP, you've got UTM, IIUM, and UTM. We are working on a different way of understanding what the university, beyond just numbers. And Alhamdulillah, we have now got Qatar University interested, one Saudi University interested, one university in Oman interested, one university in Turkey interested, another university in Bosnia interested. So we need to rework this. I mean, this is what we need to do. As a Muslim, we need to rework and reinvent and put things right rather than just following. QS say this, we do that. I don't play that game. We want to do something that we think is important for us. If we need to change the rule, we will change the rule. And that's how we're going to make the university work for the future. So the question of measurement to me is not about, I also give always simple example. When you do your salat, what are you? Are you counting numbers? How many raka'at have you done? That is simple. You know? But within the 2 raka'ats, where were you? Are you in Dubai? Are you in Qatar? Are you where? You know? So what is it that makes your salat work? Is it the numbers or is it your khusyuk? We are stuck at the word of khusyuk. How do you measure this? And I can only measure khusyuk by the way you act, by your akhlaq, by your character. And that is what I think we should be looking now. We become the KPI of ourselves. That I am here, that you judge me for what you see, not what I say. And I think this is the problem with the Muslim world. We say something else and we do something else. No, we say Rahmatan lil Alamin, but we hate the non-Muslims like hell. You know, we say Rahmatan lil Alamin, but we chase all the dogs and say this is haram, go, go, go. How do you come to terms with this? We act as we say, then we become that criteria that we are looking for. I don't know, I'm not a good Muslim scholar, but maybe brother, I saw him here now, Brother Khalid can tell better. Yeah? For example, I always ask, how does the first Khalifa picked? Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. What sort of KPI has he got? Does the Prophet give him a KPI? Yeah? If he's not picked on KPI, what business have we got to talk about KPI and KPI alone? Khalid, you want to say something? I think I've provoked you.
Thank you, Tanzri. Actually, the concept of education and university today has gone far away. It's just become commercialized. There used to be 2 words, talim and tarbiyah. The talim, of course, we remember, but the modern generation perhaps has forgotten the word tarbiyah. And universities like IIUM, we focus it from the very beginning that there should be a lot of co-curricular, etc. for things to make the students more tarbiyah. That part actually that needs to be enhanced for basically humanizing what you said just now.
And tarbiyah is also not just talking. Tarbiyah is also working and acting at the same time. My worry is you too many tarbiyah, but nothing happened.
No, because they put
you know?
co-curriculum
Okay, okay. All right.
Yeah, I think that's all for now. Let us give a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Before you close, I want to extend my apologies and forgiveness if there's anything that I've said which upsets anybody, but the intention was not that. Yeah? Let's dua to Allah Ta'ala that we get the blessing of this. Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof. If I may summarize the key takeaway, I think the youth well-being is returning to our primordial nature, understanding here our fitrah, our human nature, and being the human being, not surrendering ourselves to robots, and understanding our responsibilities, and also through humanizing education. So I think that is the process that we have to go through in order to achieve the holistic youth well-being. So thank you again, well done, Prof, for the presentation. And I also would like to thank all participation from the audience. And now I hand over to the Master of Ceremony. You're welcome.
Thank you to our moderator, Assistant Professor Dr. Ahmad El Muhammadi, and Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato' Zulkifli Abdul Razak for the very enlightening lecture and also dialogue session. Ladies and gentlemen, the event today will be continued with the presentation of souvenirs by our fellow VIPs. First, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Abdul Aziz Bergut, Dean of ISTAC IIUM, accompanied by Professor Dr. Ismi Arif Ismail, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and International, UPM, and Professor Dr. Haslinda Abdullah, Director of IPSAS UPM, to present the token of appreciation to our speaker, Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato' Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of IIUM. Please welcome. Next, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Abdul Aziz Burgud, Dean of ISTAC IIUM, to give a token of appreciation to Professor Dr. Ismi Arif Ismail, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic and International of UPM. Now, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Ismi Arif Ismail, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Academic and International UPM, to give a token of appreciation to Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato' Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of IIUM. Ladies and gentlemen, we will continue our event with the photography session with our fellow VIPs. For this, let me invite His Excellency Nail M. Latipov, the Ambassador of Russia, to the stage for the photography session. Please welcome. Thank you to all our fellow VIPs. You may be seated. Members of the floor, this marks the end of our event today. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to say thank you to all our panels and guests for their support today, and also to our VIPs for giving their time to attend this event. I would like to apologize if there are any shortcomings. Fellow VIPs and guests are invited to have some lunch at the banquet hall after this. Ladies and gentlemen, before we adjourn, invited guests are welcome to visit our exhibition booth that is located at the lobby area after this. Until we meet again, I'm Daniel Bahardin. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and have a pleasant day.